Good morning. It is 12:29 p.m., so good afternoon, I guess. On Sunday, November 10th, 2019. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. So, I actually woke up more like 7:30 and then felt like, "You know what? I could sleep a little more." And then I did. Anyway, it's Sunday, and that means I'm continuing my rewatch of Cowboy Bebop with Session 8, Waltz for Venus. This is another, episode where it's just a, singular one-shot little thing. Doesn't really tie into anyone's backstory particularly, but what a lovely little episode. I think if you dig into the mechanics of the plot, there are a couple of really dramatic plot holes slash not really plot holes, that's the wrong term, but things that happen by sheer coincidence, or we're clearly skipping over some stuff that would have had to happen in between, some places where things don't really line up precisely, but the story is moving along so well that we don't really mind. And the things that work so well that I think it's really, you'd have to be a real killjoy to get overly uptight about the fact that, like, how does Spike know to find Roko's sister in that abandoned shuttle out on Venus? Like, anyway, let's start at the beginning. We have a rare success story for the crew of the Bebop. They catch their bounty. They get to turn them in. They get money. We've seen so far in the series how that doesn't happen very often. Usually they get screwed out of their bounty one way or another. And it's interesting to note that this bounty that they finally get is for 1.5 million wulongs, which of course is less than what Spike described as small fry earlier in the series. But hey, when it's been a while with nothing, you take what you can get, right? So it's a fun sequence too, where we see what looks like, the future of commercial aircraft travel. And I think that there's, in obviously, in addition to it just being a depiction of airline travel in the future, so it's a trip to Venus instead of a trip to, Chicago or whatever. There's definitely, I think, some influence from 2001 there, which depicts a similar, journey, flight to the moon. In this case, though, we have some hijackers trying to take the ship. And, in this day and age, post 9/11 and all, the idea that on this ultra future ship, that all of these hijackers literally just have machine guns and they're carrying a bag, it's like, yeah, okay. How did that happen? So the space TSA is just as ineffective as ours, I guess. And in any event, they are working on it, and at first, it seems like, um, it's well. So at first, we don't even really see Spike or any recognizable character, but we see this hijacking start to happen. They're threatening everybody. Everyone, be cool. This is robbery, so to speak. And then we meet, first of all, our new secondary character today, Rocco Bonaro. Interestingly enough, I would have assumed that Roko was spelled Roko because that's, a name that you may have encountered elsewhere. If you've heard of a term called Roko's basilisk, you might look that up because that's such a weird idea. But I'm not going to get into that now. That's a longer story. But in any event, according to the credits and all, it's spelled Rocco, which I would have pronounced Rocco, but whatever. So in any case, we meet him who's carrying some sort of a package, and he's like, "Oh no, not today!" And he seems like concerned about this hijacking beyond what the normal concern would be. He seems like especially worried that, like, oh no, I can't let this happen. Like, if they're going to try to steal my stuff or if I get hurt, he seems that there's some larger concern beyond the immediate there. But then we realize he thinks that the hijackers are yelling to him, but he realizes then that, oh no, they're yelling at the guy who apparently is sleeping through the hijacking, which then we see is Spike, who is, comically wearing a sleep mask that has open eyes on it. And then we get a whole bit where Spike is playing dumb in order to, beat up and defeat these hijackers. And he's doing a whole shtick where it's like he doesn't even realize this is happening. He's just reaching up to stretch and knocking the guy's gun out of the way and that sort of thing. And this, of course, is where we see Rocco observing his cool, smooth moves, right? But then when Faye shows up, emerging from the bathroom just in time to spray one of the other hijackers in the face with a sleep spray, we realize, oh, it wasn't just a coincidence that Spike was on this flight. They were, the crew of the Bebop were here to hide, to take in these bounties. So good for them. They are, very impressive for once, right? They're always talented, but things go their way and they get to actually collect their bounty. How cool. So they do that. And in the meantime, though, we're kind of following this largely from the perspective of Rocco, who watches that and sees how cool they are. So then when they arrive on Venus, which is one of the things that I think is really to the credit of this show, is how they change up the visual setting, every time. This now we get a depiction of what it's like on Venus. And of course, we know that like the real Venus has all sorts of conditions that would make it impossible for people to just live outside the way that's shown here. But then again, we've also seen terraforming devices elsewhere. We've seen, people walking around on asteroids and stuff like that. So, it's not worth getting uptight about that sort of thing. But it's very neat to show like all of these sort of jungle-like things, these floating island city things. They're all pretty cool. And so we have Rocco trying to send a package and being really frustrated that there seems to be some undefined service fee that's going to make it cost a lot more. And the guy explains, it's like, well, because you're not sending it to a residence, you're sending it to a place out in the middle of the desert. And, perhaps we could, maybe that's a connection between the dots, that we could imagine if Spike heard that and found that address somewhere, that might be why he would think to go check out the shuttle when he's looking for Rocco. So that could make sense, but we certainly don't see him follow that thread. We just see him heading out to the shuttle. So maybe that's the answer, even though the show doesn't show us that. But that could make sense. Like if, he wasn't right there, but he was certainly in the area because Rocco finishes up sending the package and then runs after Spike. So we could imagine that Spike may have seen where he came from, followed up on that. But in any event, Rocco comes at Spike with a knife, is easily dispatched, sent to the floor, and then reveals that he's not trying to attack Spike at all. He was basically just trying to prove, like, to himself how cool Spike is, that he could just, that he's that good, could easily deal with such a thing. And he's very enthusiastic, saying, "You're so cool. I love all your moves." And he's doing like cliche, like kung fu sort of, and he's kind of making Bruce Lee noises, which is interesting because, of course, Spike's explanation of his martial arts, be like water, all that stuff is, is riffing off of a Bruce Lee quote. And so, but in this bit, though, he's saying, "Hey, could you teach me to do that cool stuff?" And Spike is, his immediate reaction is just like, "No, don't be stupid, go away." But the guy's persistent, right? We see him get outsmarted of missing an elevator, but then he apparently runs down the stairs fast enough to catch Spike getting out of the elevator on the next level. We see him all sweaty and everything, and it's like, this guy is clearly very motivated. And he's also kind of charming. I mean, he's kind of a dork. He's like, he's coming on very strong, but he's kind of fun, right? Like he's not a doesn't seem like a bad guy. He's sort of prevailing on Spike for a lot. The idea of like, hey, teach me to be as awesome as you are, when we also know, Spike's awesomeness certainly comes with a lot of baggage, right? In any event, eventually Spike is persuaded to, okay, fine, I'll show you a little bit. And that we see them go out into the grass, and they do a little bit of moving back and forth, and Spike is explaining, you're too tense. You need to not just be using excessive strength, but fluid motion. You need to be in a place where you can react without having to think about it, and channel the opponent's power. And the Spike Lee quote, or Spike Lee, no, Bruce Lee. The Bruce Lee quote apparently is, "You must be shapeless, formless, like water. When you pour water in a cup, it becomes the cup. When you pour water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. When you pour water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can drip and it can crash. Become like water, my friend." This Bruce Lee quote. And of course, I mean, you hear that quote and Spike's dialogue in this, it's obviously a connection, right? So he conveys that lesson in a sort of memorable way, so that it can come back later, of course, right? So but in the meantime, they're actually connecting a little bit, in the sense of Spike is kind of realizing, oh yeah, this guy, he's not bad. He's, maybe I can help him a little bit. But then all of a sudden, Rocco sees these other guys, these other tough looking guys coming out of the airport, hands Spike this parcel that he's been guarding, and says, "Hang on to this. I'll meet you in this, cathedral space, the day after tomorrow," and then just runs away. And Spike's just like, "Wait, what?" And so at this point, he's just confused. But that's when we go back to the Bebop, and Jet is, has bought brand new fancy dog food for Ein, which is like, Jet is such a good dog daddy. um, Jet is always just trying to take care of everybody. He's such a good guy. So he's bought new food for Ein, and they're kind of celebrating, and they're both kind of complaining about how Faye is apparently immediately off to lose all of her share at casino gambling. They're annoyed by that, but we certainly are going to learn a bit more about why she's so desperate. Why she always gambles everything away. And I mean, the loose reason, of course, just being she is in so much debt that she, literally, like, just trying to save it up in any ordinary way is just never going to happen. So she's just trying to count on the idea that maybe if she can win a bajillion Wulong, then that'll just. But we could also imagine that that's not necessarily actually a good plan. It's just sort of the excuse for engaging in that behavior. But we'll learn more about that in a future episode. But this is the point where Jet is saying, hey, let's keep the momentum going. Here's another bounty we could catch. And Spike realizes that one of this gang of 4 that they're supposed to bring in is Rocco, the guy he just met. And why are they wanted? Well, they stole this gray ash plant, which is used to make a special medicine for a Venus sickness. And of course, at this point, Spike decides to open the little parcel Rocco gave him, and of course, it is one of these plants. And that's where we get it's like, okay, yeah, okay, we're starting to put things together now. And we learn that these plants themselves are incredibly valuable, and there's the question raised by Faye and Jet, like, should we just sell the plant? I mean, it's worth way more than the actual bounty is. But at the same time, Jet kind of puts that down, saying like, well, except that it's so illegal and so rare that to find a buyer for it would be really like unsafe and dangerous. And so, they have to do something with it, but theoretically, what he's suggesting is, well, let's still catch the bounty and turn it in along with them, right? I guess they don't really discuss that in detail. But in any event, they're gonna take care of this bounty, and Spike specifically says that he's gonna go after Roko. And this is, of course, where we have him. He's going off and he's trying to find Roko, and he goes off to find this shuttle. And this is where, again, it's like the episode does not show us how he figures out to go there. In the meantime, we also have, so he shows up there. He meets Stella, who initially, gets the drop on him with a gun, except that we realize that she's blind. And so, he is not really in any danger from him. And he explains that he's looking for Roko, and she says, "Oh, I'm his sister. She's blind because of Venus sickness." And we see that she's received this package that he sent, which is a lovely little music box. And while she's showing it to him, Spike finds a little hidden panel in it that has more of the seeds of this plant. And at this point, she's lovely. She's explaining how, she's been blind for a long time due to this sickness. And she knows that Roko really wants to take care of her and help her get better, but it's expensive to get the treatment. And that, she's like, she loves him, and she knows that he's doing that out of love, but she's almost like, I would be okay like this, but he just can't let it go. And she talks a little bit about how, she feels in some ways that she understands things better without, being distracted by seeing, which, there might be some truth to that, but I don't know. In any event, though, she's a lovely person, and Spike is just charmed by her, and also retroactively raises his perception of Roko a few notches, because he realizes, okay, Roko's kind of a joke, but he's also like, he's doing it to help his sister. He's got a noble motivation for all the dumb stuff he's doing. And so in the meantime, we have another big coincidence, but this one is funny enough that I don't really care. It's that Roko just runs into the guys that are chasing him by accident in the men's room. And it's in fact very much reminiscent of Pulp Fiction in a way that I think might be intentional, in the sense that in Pulp Fiction, Bruce Willis's character is trying to get away from Ving Rhames' character, and thinks he has, he snuck into his apartment to get something. He's driving away. He's very pleased. And then he pulls up to a crosswalk just in time to have the guy who's chasing him be walking across with coffee and see him, and then it's like, oh no. And the reason I think that it might be deliberate here is just that Piccolo, the guy who's chasing him, has a little bit of a resemblance maybe to Ving Rhames' character in Pulp Fiction. I don't know for a fact that it's an influence, but it seems likely. So he's caught. They beat him up. He's just taking it. He's not going to tell them anything until they mention they know about his sister. And so, that's where he, draws the line. Meantime, we have stuff going on with Spike that doesn't really, with Faye, that doesn't really fully make sense either. We get to see her be badass and cool in this little bar, trying to follow up leads on Piccolo, where, a bunch of people draw their guns on her and she shoots the guns out of their hands, and she's awesome. But at the same time, it's all just to find Piccolo. And then later she talks about like, oh, it was all a wild goose chase. We were just being set up. But were they? Is that what was happening? I mean, in a way, yeah, that is what was happening, because once his sister was threatened, Roko did agree to lead them, to this cathedral where he's going to meet Spike, presumably with the idea of like, you want the plant back, don't hurt me or my sister, or ideally them either, but if you want the plant back, this is how we do it. But how does Faye get that information? Again, like, we could imagine that maybe somehow she, like, this wild goose chase part is the part that we don't see any of a wild goose chase, but we could imagine that at some point she gets some intel about them, that they're actually planning this ambush. And so, okay, fine, so she's on her way there. But in the meantime, we have Rocco and Spike meet, but it's actually this ambush. At this point, though, this apparently, according to Rocco, is the first time that he learns that Spike is a bounty hunter. So why would there have been a need for an ambush? Why would it have been connected to Faye at all? Again, I'm not really concerned with any of this. I think if you just let this, be like water and let the story just carry you along, and it works fine. It's only when you kind of try to start thinking about the behind the scenes stuff that it doesn't always line up precisely. But in any event, when Spike is, lets him know, it's like, I know what you were trying to do. I found the seeds and everything. Or no, he doesn't say that yet, but you know, Rocco's conflicted. Is like, he wants Spike to try to help his sister. He's worried he's just doomed. There's, everyone's shooting around. Faye shows up with her ship and is just shooting everything. And so there's lots of we get some of the action stuff here. And at this point, we see one of the gang members try to come up and take the plant from Rocco. And then there's this great moment where Rocco suddenly channels "Be like the water," and he does the same thing. He flips the guy around, and he's just like, "All right." And then Spike gives him the thumbs up, but only it's, of course, just a moment of levity to set up the tragedy that he is then shot in the back. Looks like it's going to be lethal. Falls to the ground, and the plant in its little container shatters and it wilts. And oh no, right? Like, oh no. And then so Spike is going to try to help him. Faye manages to corner the bad guys, and so the shooting stops, but the Spike is down there trying to take care of Rocco. And Rocco is just such a sweet dummy as he's laying there. Is like, "Hey, did you see me? Did you see me, master? Like, I did it like you said. I was like the water." And it's like, "Yeah, you did great, buddy. Hang in there. Don't try to talk." All that stuff, which, like, I'm laughing at because a lot of it is cliche, but at the same time, like, oh. But in any event, Rocco tries to tell him, it's like, about the seeds. Spike already knows. And Rocco dies. It's a tragedy. And so that's all that can be done. We later see that Stella's in the hospital because someone, she assumes Rocco, has arranged for her to receive this medical treatment, despite the fact of how expensive it would have been. And that means that she is going to be able to have her sight restored, but it's not restored yet. And so Spike comes to see her and give her flowers and let her know that her brother is dead. And there's some discussion there between them about, like, well, how did it happen? She's assuming, well, I guess he must have been doing something bad if he got killed. And she talks about never having been able to see Rocco with her own eyes, which, I suppose if we think about why that would be, we could imagine that if she's older and she went blind before he was born, that could make sense, but it's not obvious. It also doesn't really matter. But she wanted to be able to see him with her own eyes, like the first thing she saw. And she asks Spike, what was he really like? And this is where Spike returns to the thing that they had discussed before, which is that being blind, sometimes she's able to understand things better. And he says, you knew better than anyone. He was great. He was a terrific guy. And so then we also, we finished the episode on that bittersweet note with returning to what she had described earlier, which is that these spores, which make some people sick, are also themselves kind of beautiful when they drift down from the plants above like snow, and that starts to happen. And so, it's a sad kind of, it's a bittersweet note to finish this episode on. It's a sad little micro story, but a really lovely one, I think. And once again, we have Spike kind of in this position of, he has so much pain in his past that is kind of beneath the surface of this tranquil water that he puts it out to the world, right? This laissez-faire sort of almost laziness that he kind of puts out as a vibe is really kind of just masking the deeper turmoil, right? And so him seeing other people going through some of these same sorts of troubles uh, is, got to be painful for him to observe, and especially when he's seeing good people meet sorry ends in that way. But yeah, so it's a nice, lovely little sad episode. But next time is session 9, jamming with Edward. And every rewatch, I forget how far into the series it gets before we meet Edward, because Edward's in the opening credits and yet doesn't even show up until session 9. But I love Edward. Edward is such a great character. I'm very glad that we get to meet them next time. So as I continue my rewatch next week on Sunday, we'll talk about jamming with Edward. And in the meantime, I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.